So last year, this is what we built and used as our greenhouse for our seedlings. Only it wasn't until we started actually using it that we realized how mediocre it really was. We knew we needed something different. So let's go. So that old greenhouse that you just saw there was built using a lot of reclaimed material from the old farmhouse, including that patio door, which made that thing super sketchy to use. The patio door weighs a ton. Well, you know, not a ton, but it weighs about probably a good 80 pounds. And we had gas struts on there to help lift it, but it was still extremely difficult to lift. And then just the slightest amount of pressure would actually bring that door crashing back down. So it was kind of unnerving reaching on the inside to work on your plants and then wonder, is this thing gonna stay up or is it gonna fall down on top of me? On a nice breezy day, the wind, if it caught that door just right, it could work it down that it would fall. So we had to build something a little bit safer. And the biggest reason behind doing all of this in the first place is because we wanted to extend our growing periods. Get started a little bit earlier in the year and continue growing a little bit later on into the year. Building this greenhouse was just a lot easier than trying to find the space in either my parents' house or my house to build an indoor grow room with artificial lights and a bunch of other artificially simulated outdoor conditions. This was a really neat tip that my dad found watching some other YouTuber. You just take some black pipe, slide one on all the way up past your bend point, and then the other up to your bend point, and then you can use that one as a lever and then get some really nice bends on your rebar. So things were really going well up to this point. We'll get to that in just a second, but right here I'm just laying down some rebar chairs underneath of the rebar so that it stays suspended during the pour inside of the forms. That way the concrete completely encases the rebar. So don't do what I did right here. I didn't have a mask when I poured this first bag into the mixer, but after I saw how dusty it was, I made sure to put one on. And I'm pretty sure if you were to read the instructions on the bag somewhere, it tells you to use a mask when using this material, but that's time for that. Just make sure you wear a mask. Now, right after we poured this first load of concrete into the forms, we realized we forgot to spray the forms with some sort of a release agent. So we made sure we went and got our little blue pump sprayer that you can see in the background there, filled it up with some diesel fuel and sprayed down all the boards to make sure that the forms would come off nice and easy without causing any breakouts, chips, or cracks in our newly poured concrete. Now my dad still thinks it's really great that we put these bolts in the concrete when they were wet, which is what we used to fasten the bottom sill of our walls down to the footing with, but they were a real pain to try and float the concrete around, and it made it kind of inconvenient. My opinion, I would just drill holes into the concrete and use an expanding anchor bolt. It'd be a lot easier just to make sure that you get your concrete floated out the way that you want. So there it is. We are a bunch of amateurs, and this concrete probably is not perfect, but it's close enough for us, and you guys can do it too. As we're framing our greenhouse walls, one of the things that you really want to make sure is that if you plan to use any reclaimed materials like windows, you really want to make sure that you have your windows before you start building your walls, so that way you can measure those and then create your rough openings accordingly. You don't want to just start planning out your walls on a piece of paper and figure out some common dimensions for windows, because if you don't plan to go buy your windows brand new, it's going to be really hard to find a specific window size to fit what you need if you're just going to buy them off a marketplace like we did. This rough opening that you see right here was for one really large window that we had. And it's great. We got every single window for this greenhouse for just $20 a piece. But this one was so big, and it wasn't a picture window, it was multiple casement windows all tied together. It had to have weighed all of 300 to 400 pounds. It was super heavy. For just 2 people to try and lift, I was afraid I was gonna drop it the first time I picked it up. But we got it home and we're like, man, what are we gonna do now? Like, how are we gonna lift this into the wall without creating any kind of damage to it or dropping it or breaking something? Like, we were really trying to figure out what we were going to do. And then my dad came up with a brilliant idea that you're gonna see here coming up. And if you're watching closely too, you'll also notice that the seasons change. Now, this build only took us about 28 days, but that was 28 days spanned over the course of several months. We started on Labor Day and it finished up right around the end of November, or right around that opening week of deer hunting, which falls just before Thanksgiving. So here's that really huge window that I was talking about. You can see I'm struggling to push it. Rikki's trying to push it. My dad's trying to pull on it. Like, this window just weighed, like I said, all of 300 to 400 pounds. And then my dad had this really good idea. He's like, well, why don't we just take the forks off of our tractor? We'll put them on the skid loader, and then that way we can lift, walk, and crawl the window up to the rough opening, which is what we ended up doing. And I'm glad he thought of it, because I can guarantee if we would have tried doing this manually, we would have dropped something, broke something, or hurt somebody. Like, it would have been bad. Then all we had to do was just slide it off the forks once we had it lifted up to the rough opening, and it was in. This just went so smooth using the skid loader. So using polycarbonate panels for a greenhouse roof is a great material choice, but it's not very easy to work with. And here we're just putting down some double-sided stick tape for the H channels that hold the panels down, and then we put it across as well so that way the panels had something to stick to, just to make sure everything was well reinforced. And then at the bottom of the panels here, you use a perforated tape that allows the panels to breathe to minimize the amount of condensation buildup in the channels of the polycarbonate. And then on the top side here, we put down another flexible fabric type of tape that just seals up the channels, so that way no insects can crawl down the channels of the polycarbonate and collect on the inside. So for this first one where I was able to reach up through the rafters, it was pretty easy. My dad was able to get the one end from outside the greenhouse, and I was able to get the other side from reaching up through, but you can see that the lengths of the ridge cap are not the same as the widths of the panels, and eventually they start to stagger to the point where it gets really hard to reach and either install your next ridge cap or put your next piece of polycarbonate panel in. And then trying to fasten it all down just gets to be a real headache. So we did end up using tar paper as an underlayment for our walls, and you might be asking, well, why wouldn't you use Tyvek? It's a better material, and it is a better material to use. However, we wanted to try and keep this build as cost efficient as possible and use any materials that we had laying around. And we happen to have tar paper, so that's what we used. The only downside to the tar paper is that over the course of years, with the sun beating on the siding, getting hot and warm, going through the transitions of our seasons, the tar paper will eventually dry out and become very brittle. So if we were to ever take the siding off again for any reason, the tar paper is going to just crack and crumble right off. So this right here was Thanksgiving Day. I remember my dad and I having a really unsuccessful morning of deer hunting, so we said we might as well go do something productive and try to get some more work done on the greenhouse before we have to go visit family for the day. So we came back up. It was like 65 degrees here, so we took advantage of the nice weather and made sure that we tried to get as much done as we could. So this is the weekend right after Thanksgiving. Like, it went from 65 back down to 30 some degrees, almost 20 degrees. With a wind chill, it was even colder. It was just ridiculous. So I'm glad we got as much done as we could during Thanksgiving Day. And now, as you can see, we have a nice greenhouse that we can actually walk inside of. And if you notice the thermometer on the wall here, it's up over 100 degrees. But with our nice crank out casement windows, we'll be able to easily control the temperature inside the greenhouse. So if you want to see how convenient custom raised garden beds are that are made out of 55-gallon plastic barrels, make sure you check out this video right here where you'll see us installing them into our greenhouse to put the finishing touches on this project.